Trump collapsed inside Buckingham Palace, but it wasn't exhaustion, and it wasn't random. Moments earlier, he was warned by King Charles to put away a folder he shouldn't have had. Then, mid-sentence, he fell. And for the first time in years, a royal guard broke formation and triggered the hidden alarm reserved only for royal threats. As the palace descended into silence, Pam Bondi slipped the sealed royal folder into her handbag. Hours later, she leaked the truth. What was inside that document? Why did Trump collapse when the guard stepped forward? And why did the Crown try to silence everything? Watch to the end, because this time the guard didn't protect the king. He exposed the plan. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your thoughts in the comments. This story, you won't forget it. Buckingham Palace had an atmosphere that could press against your ribs without ever raising its voice. Inside the state dining room, the candles were tall, the crystal taller, and the silence between toasts carried more weight than the speeches themselves. Around the long, polished table sat 24 names history might remember, but only one name that had already bent it to his will. Sergeant Ewan Hart stood on the far side of the corridor wall, still as plaster, watching the evening unfold through a sliver of half-open mahogany. The doors framed a glimpse of silverware, candlelight and ceremony, so well drilled it passed for effortless. To the guests inside, he was no more than the posture at the corner of the eye. To the protocol team, he was the last line before emergency became incident. A movement caught his attention. A US aide, barely old enough to rent the suit he wore, slipped through the far door with a flat leather folio pressed close to his ribs. No escort, no announcement. But Hart saw it, the wax seal flashing red beneath the table as the folder passed under a linen napkin. Not diplomatic, not State Department red, royal red. Then came the man himself. Donald Trump entered like he was stepping onto a debate stage, not a royal dining floor. His energy was measured but unmistakable. Shoulders slightly forward, chin lifted half a beat too long, gaze scanning for cameras even in a room that forbade them. As he crossed Hart's post, he gave the guard a dry, almost amused glance. "Evening." "Evening, sir," Hart replied, posture unmoving. Their exchange lasted no more than a second, but it told Hart what he needed to know. Trump's eye had flicked to the corridor once, not for threat, but for acknowledgement, for leverage. That folder was more than briefing material. It was leverage wrapped in velvet. As the door eased shut behind him, Hart tapped his encrypted tablet and typed with gloved fingers. R17 watch, unverified custody of sealed royal folio, red crest, civilian carrier, guest proximity. Then he stood motionless again. The palace breathed in, and the room kept eating. The grand staircase hummed with restrained opulence, but the guard corridor, that narrow artery running parallel to the state dining floor, was quiet as a courtroom before the verdict. Its walls bore the patina of history, but not ostentation. Here the ceilings were lower, the lamps dimmer, and the air smelled faintly of polished brass and freshly pressed uniform. Sergeant Ewan Hart stood centred on a ceremonial compass etched into the stone floor, his boots exactly touching its outer ring, more by instinct than by effort. His red tunic caught the light from a nearby sconce, the white crossbelt pressed flat over the chest, his tall, plain, solid black ceremonial bearskin hat, unmoving even as a gust of air rolled in from the servants' staircase. Stillness is often mistaken for detachment. But Hart's stillness was measured, engineered for function. He wasn't idle, he was reading. The way a shift manager reads rhythm in a factory or a watchmaker listens for the tick that's out of time. Every squeak of shoe, every slowed voice, every opened door. He heard it all. He clocked the violinist's change in tempo. The room had entered the speech and salad phase, where conversations stretch and composure thins. Hart adjusted nothing but his breath. From his post, he could see into the far antechamber, where Lieutenant C.M. de Ruth Ellison, the equerry, moved like a metronome, tracking place cards, adjusting a steward's gait, with a two-finger signal so subtle it could be mistaken for an itch. She passed a footman who held a silver tray bearing 3 unused crest pins, meant for coats that had not arrived. Then came the sound that made Hart's ear sharpen. a flat slide of leather on linen. He couldn't see it, but he didn't need to. Somewhere under that grand table, that royal sealed folio had been shifted, and someone, not from the palace, was repositioning it. Pam Bondi sat 2/3 down the table, not at Trump's elbow, but close enough to speak without needing to raise her voice. As the king conversed with a senior peer of the realm, Bondi leaned down to adjust her heel, then briefly lifted the tablecloth's hem as if searching for a dropped utensil. Her eyes landed on the red wax. She stilled. Hart saw that stillness too. It wasn't a freeze, it was recognition. A staffer from the press office moved past Hart's corridor, young, rushed, and pocketing something from a silver tray. Not food. A broadcast label from a restricted press camera, subtle but notable. Someone was planning ahead for what not to show. Hart didn't move, but a current had shifted in the palace's bloodstream. The kind you only feel if your boots are bolted to the nerve. He didn't log a second report, not yet. But the weight behind his stillness had changed. And Buckingham, whether it knew it or not, was now balancing on a decision no one could see being made. Sergeant Ewan Hart knew the corridors of Buckingham like old wounds, not because they'd scarred him, but because they spoke the same language he did: measured silence, structured duty, and the refusal to flinch. The ache in his left knee, an unwelcome souvenir from Helmand, had begun its slow, familiar whisper. The palace's old floors cooled faster than the air, and tonight the stone felt colder than it should have. He didn't shift weight, not yet, but the pain reminded him stillness is earned. The bearskin on his head might have made him look like a relic from a museum tour. To some guests he was, a statue in red, a costume, a photograph waiting to happen. But inside that hat, behind the stillness, Hart's mind never stopped moving, not after all these years, not after what he'd seen. Stillness isn't silence, his father had once written to him. It's the space you clear so others can speak nonsense, and you can hear the truth beneath it. That line was folded into a yellowing letter tucked away in Hart's personal locker, written during the Falklands, when his father still had both legs and still believed the job made you better. Most days, Hart lived by that same creed. Don't break unless it breaks you. But tonight, he wasn't sure whether that folder was going to break the air first, or whether someone inside would force his hand. He remembered the pram, a few years back, a spring afternoon on the Mall. Wind gusted hard. A mother's scream broke protocol before the wheels did. The baby's pram had rolled directly toward the procession route. Hart stepped out of line, not even 2 full paces, just enough to halt it. The commander dressed him down that evening, but a few days later Princess Anne had passed him on the gravel near Wellington Barracks. She'd said nothing, just gave a short nod, tight and approving. That nod stayed with him longer than the reprimand, and tonight felt similar, different stakes, but the same tingle at the base of the neck, the same narrowing of choices that felt more like duty than decision. He replayed Trump's voice, evening, not hostile, but aware. It wasn't a greeting, it was a calibration, as if the former president had measured the power in the room and taken the guard's presence as one more asset on the board. Trump wasn't wrong to do that, but he was wrong if he thought Hart could be played. Inside, the violinists changed keys again. A warmer harmony, lower, a transition into the quieter half of the evening. Toasts had likely been given. The folio, still unseen but undeniably present, had shifted again, enough for the tension in Hart's jaw to register. He didn't blink. He didn't reach for his tablet again. But he made the decision. If it moves once more, I move with it, no matter who's holding it. Inside the state dining room, the air had thickened, not with heat, but with importance. It was that quiet pause after the main course, where speeches begin to taper and real conversations start to lean forward. Silverware rested, posture softened. But the weight in the room had shifted, and it wasn't dessert. King Charles sat at the centre of the long table, voice measured, tone cool. His words passed through the air like polished stones, rounded by experience, deliberate in placement. Of course, the king was saying, so long as all parties understand this is still in draft, and therefore not yet in motion. Across from him, Donald Trump leaned forward slightly, his left hand resting beside the now visible leather folio, its red wax crest facing upward. Hart, still stationed outside the dining hall, caught the glint through the half-open door. The seal reflected a shimmer of candlelight like blood under glass. Trump smiled, thin, tight, not hostile, just certain. "Draft or not," he said, voice carrying easily down the table, "when all parties agree to treat something as settled, then maybe it already is." It was the kind of line meant to travel. The smile on Charles's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker, a measure of temperature, the kind of calibration monarchs make when deciding whether to confront or contain. Pam Bondi's hand was already on the folder, not protective, not hiding it, just there. The way someone rests a hand on a Bible during an oath. "The draft," Charles said, "carries the seal of the crown. Until it is returned to the archive, it is not yours to carry, it is mine to reclaim." Trump tapped the folder twice, once lightly, then again with emphasis. "I brought it," he said, "because it seemed safer here than in a vault waiting for dust." Bondi opened her mouth to add, to explain, or to pivot, but she didn't get the chance. Trump's left hand clenched around the edge of the table, his breath caught. Hart saw it through the seam of the door before anyone else did. A twitch, a slight shudder in the shoulders, a loss of colour that started in the ears and drained across the face like a curtain being drawn. King Charles sat up straighter. "Sir?" Bondi asked sharply. Trump tried to answer. No sound came. His glass tipped sideways, catching a knife on the way down. The ring of metal on metal was small, but in this room small was everything. Then, collapse. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just sudden. A large man folding inward, slow and frighteningly soft. A chair scraped. Bondi caught his arm. A steward took 2 steps forward and stopped, unsure if protocol allowed action yet. The folio slid off the table and struck the carpet spine first. The wax seal remained intact, but it had landed face up, staring at the ceiling like it belonged to someone who no longer could. From the corridor, Hart moved. No ceremony now, no theatre, just a decision. He stepped toward the concealed brass stud on the wall, pressed it with the heel of his palm, and triggered silver aegis. No sound, no flashing light. But deep beneath the palace, something old and practiced came alive. The kind of system built for moments that history wouldn't explain until morning. The palace responded like a heartbeat that had skipped once, then resumed with precision. Down a secured corridor below the ground floor, a silent signal activate. Silver aegis. No alarms, no lights, just a tremor in the chain of responsibility. The Royal Medical Response Team, trained for events the public would never hear about, stepped into motion. Screens were readied, access points sealed. Above, Sergeant Ewan Hart took a single step away from his post. It was not rushed, it was deliberate. The kind of step the old guards used to describe with reverence the moment the picture moves. He crossed the antechamber in 3 strides. Footmen instinctively shifted, unsure whether to stand down or assist. They did neither. Hart reached the far wall and beneath the carved floral motif pressed the heel of his palm into a smooth panel of oak. The pressure point gave under his weight. Click. The signal was sent. Then he turned, opened the dining room doors, and walked into the most secret room in the palace, not because of its chandeliers or its legacy, but because, in this moment, it held power unguarded. Trump lay half-slumped in his chair, breath shallow but returning. His right hand had fallen limp over the side, fingers twitching faintly. The royal folio was on the carpet, red seal still intact, sitting like a challenge no one wanted to answer first. Bondi hovered close, speaking low to Trump, words meant for his ear only. She looked up at Hart once. Their eyes met. He saw calculation, not panic, in hers. She wasn't surprised. She was strategizing. The equerry, Lieutenant D. Ellison, arrived from the side hallway with quiet urgency. "Silver aegis?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Activated," Hart replied. "Royal sealed folio visible. Custody unclear. Medical entered behind her. 2 palace physicians and a nurse, moving as one. A screen unfolded around Trump within seconds, shielding him from view. Dr. James Merrick knelt. "Pulse?" he asked. A nurse checked. "Rapid but stable. No obvious cardiac signs." Bondi glanced to the folio on the floor. Heart didn't move. Merrick gently tapped Trump's cheek. "Sir? Can you hear me?" Trump's eyes fluttered, then opened halfway. He looked groggy, but present. His mouth opened slightly. He exhaled 2 strained words. "Don't. Take it." Hart stepped forward, not aggressively, deliberately. "Sir, remain still." Trump tried to lift his hand toward the folio, but couldn't quite reach it. Bondi touched his wrist, gently grounding him. "I've got it," she whispered. As Merrick took vitals, Bondi crouched as if steadying herself. Her hand passed beneath the screen, under the edge of the tablecloth. She retrieved the folio with practiced ease, tucking it into the crook of her arm. When she rose again, it was gone. Just another prop, absorbed into the folds of protocol. Lieutenant C.M. Desar Ellison stepped beside Hart. Her voice was low, clipped. "You're certain?" I saw the seal. Wax red, cross-hatched. Chain ribbon. Hart didn't blink. Archive grade. Ellison nodded once, already switching mental gears from ceremony to crisis. Sir Adrian, the master of the household, arrived seconds later. "I'll inform the Privy Purse Office," he said quietly. "Inventory must begin immediately." Hart logged the incident on his encrypted tablet. Silver Aegis triggered. Royal document exposed. Guest collapsed. Custody unreconciled. Folio no longer in open view. He paused before locking the entry. Because something had changed now. Not just the room, but the story the room would tell later. And Hart knew stories that start with silence always end with noise. In the medical anteroom, the light had shifted. Not in colour, still warm, still golden, but in tone. It was the kind of light that softened around power, trying to make it look human. Donald Trump sat upright now, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a damp cloth pressed to the back of his neck. His breath was steady, his eyes sharper. But the effort to appear recovered was obvious in the overcorrection. An ex-president performing strength, not for the cameras, but for the people around him who would write the post-mortem. Bondi stood near the fireplace, phone in one hand, handbag in the other. She hadn't let it leave her grip since she'd slipped the folio inside. Lieutenant C.M. Desar Ellison entered, with the ease of someone who never allowed herself to rush, even when she wanted to. She nodded at Dr. Merrick, who responded with a slight tilt of the head and an upturned hand. "He's fine, but not harmless." Trump caught Ellison's glance and spoke before she could. "So, what's the headline?" he asked dryly. "Man stands up too fast in foreign palace, royal carpets too soft for American knees." "No headlines, sir," Ellison said calmly, "because nothing left this room." "Yet," he replied, voice low. Bondi cleared her throat. "We'll issue a simple statement, a minor episode, jet lag, hydration, tension, all reasonable." "And the document?" Ellison asked. "Secure," Bondi said, with just enough emphasis to make it a declaration. "Not reviewed, not opened, no contents disclosed." Ellison didn't ask where it was. She knew, and she knew better than to ask out loud. A soft knock on the door. Sir Adrian Lyle stepped in, ledger under arm, expression unreadable. "Privy Purse Office has confirmed," he said. "The draft instrument in question is part of the Crown's sealed diplomatic holding set. It was checked out for archival review, but was never cleared for off-site transport, especially not to a public state dinner." Trump didn't react. He was already past denial. He was preparing the spin. Bondi was faster. "The intention," she said, "was to safeguard. Visibility prevents disappearance. That's how chain of custody works in my world." "In ours," Ellison replied, "chain of custody begins and ends with the sovereign, not with guests." Trump looked at Hart, who stood to the side, silent, upright, watching the room like a man studying a chessboard for threats no one else could see. "You pulled the alarm," Trump said. "Yes, sir." "You thought I'd steal it?" Hart didn't blink. "I thought it was somewhere it should never be. That's all that mattered." Trump smirked. bitter amusement flickering across his face. You realize what that makes you? Hart raised an eyebrow slightly. A headline generator, Trump muttered. That little button? That's the sound of scandal without sound. No, sir, Hart replied. That's the sound of a mistake being stopped before it became scandal. The room paused. Sir Adrian cleared his throat. We've suppressed footage. No cameras in the dining room, no staff chatter has escaped. But we recommend a discreet resolution tonight. Nothing public. Nothing that invites further inquiry. Bondi nodded. Agreed. Trump stood slowly, bracing a hand on the armrest. This place, he said, adjusting his cuff, is very good at silence. But the world outside... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Hart watched as the man gathered himself, not just physically, but politically. This wasn't over. It had only been paused. And somewhere in Bondi's handbag, a document meant to remain inside a Crown vault sat wrapped in protocol and speculation, waiting for someone to decide what story it would tell next. Outside the palace, London still slept. But inside the Queen's private corridor, near the East Wing archway where staff rarely passed at night, Pam Bondi sat alone, her back straight, elbows resting on a narrow antique desk that smelled faintly of old wood and rose oil. She'd asked for a moment alone to compose the statement. What she was actually composing was something else. The leather handbag sat open beside her. No motion sensor, no locked case. Just a familiar purse. Inside, the royal sealed folio rested between a lipstick and a glasses case. She didn't open it. Instead, she angled her phone toward the bag's interior and clicked 2 quick photos. The edge of the folder, the unmistakable red wax seal, the archive crest half obscured by shadow. No pages, no content, just implication. She sent the images to a secure signal contact, saved as R. Falcon, with a single caption. Collapse wasn't health. Guard triggered alarm on custody breach. Protocol silenced it, but the Crown moved. A minute later, a reply came in. Ready to release. Anonymous source. Bondi stared at the screen. Thought about it. Then she typed. Legal advisor present. Confidentiality preserved. Context only. No content. Send. Far across London, a junior editor at a mid-tier political media outlet would receive that message, check the metadata, verify the timing, and recognize what every journalist dreams of, a controlled leak, not noise. A narrative. And by dawn, the world would know something happened inside Buckingham Palace. Back inside the palace, Hart remained stationed by the south corridor, eyes steady on the polished double doors that had returned to stillness. Most of the staff had cleared. The medical team had returned below. Sir Adrian and the equerry were compiling logs. Trump and Bondi had been escorted discreetly to a secondary guest chamber. No interviews, no exit press line. But something had changed. Hart didn't need to see the phone. He could feel it. Like pressure building in the air before a storm. He'd learned to trust it. In Helmond, that kind of instinct kept you alive. In Buckingham, it kept the Crown intact. The palace's comms officer passed him, walkie clipped to his jacket, and muttered, "Social media flag just tripped. Something's live." Hart said nothing. He didn't have to. Inside the communications office, screens flickered with the first signs of public chatter. A small outlet had posted a thread. Was Trump's collapse really about health, or about a document only the palace had rights to? Attached, a blurred image of a wax-sealed folder, red, faintly crest-marked, beside a linen napkin. Bondi's watermark wasn't on it, but the room had been captured all the same. 10 minutes later, Lieutenant C.M. de Moultz Ellison approached Hart outside the main corridor. Media caught scent. I figured, her voice dropped. We still don't know if the leak was accidental, tactical, or both. Hart looked straight ahead. Won't change what happened. No, but it changes what happens next. She handed him a folded slip of paper. It bore the royal cipher. He opened it. Silver Aegis. Action confirmed. Judgment correct. Hart didn't react, but in that moment he felt the weight of silence shift back towards stillness, which is how you know it worked. By morning, Buckingham Palace was dressed in its usual composure. Flags still crisp, windows still gleaming, and not a single step out of place. To tourists, it was just another day. To insiders, it was the quietest kind of firestorm. A royal black car pulled away from the North Gate just after dawn. Inside, King Charles and Queen Camilla. No press statement, no formal exit. Just a brief, highly unplanned departure under the guise of privacy. The press, already circling like sharks after Bondi's leak, noticed. But all lenses before long turned back to the figure who hadn't moved all night. Sergeant Ewan Hart stood alone in the centre of the eastern courtyard, fully uniformed. Ceremonial tunic crisp, tall, plain, solid black, ceremonial bearskin hat, casting a long shadow as the early sun angled across the square. He hadn't been ordered to stand there. He had chosen it, not in protest, not in punishment, but in presence. A silent act that said, yes, I broke stillness. Yes, I pressed the alarm. And yes, I would do it again. It wasn't a performance, it was a signal. Guardsmen passed at a distance, most not making eye contact, but a few did. One nodded. Another slowed briefly before returning to pace. Tradition didn't like gestures, but sometimes tradition bowed its head. From the west balcony, Lieutenant Siemdani Ellison stepped into view. She didn't wave, didn't signal, just watched him for a few moments. Then she stepped back inside. In the communications wing, a debate was already underway. Bondi's leak was triggering ripple effects. Foreign outlets demanding comment, Parliament aides whispering about overreach, royal legal teams quietly reinforcing gag orders. But the thing that bothered everyone most wasn't what had leaked, it was what hadn't. No one outside had seen what Hart had seen. No video captured the precise moment Trump lost control of the narrative. No audio recorded the sentence, "Don't take it." And no one yet had dared ask what was inside the folio. Because as long as no one asked, the Crown could pretend it didn't need to answer. But Hart knew better. He'd been part of moments like this before, moments that history pretends were smaller than they felt. And so he stood, not for glory, not for recognition, but because in every institution there is always one man who stays still while the walls shift around him, one man who signals by his very presence that the line was crossed and caught. As camera crews began to cluster behind the palace gates, zooming in on the silent red figure framed by white stone and morning sun, the narrative was no longer in Trump's hands, nor Bondi's, nor even the palace's. It belonged to the moment, and the moment belonged to the guard. What do you think really happened inside Buckingham Palace that night? Should the royal guard be praised for breaking protocol or punished for stepping in? And do you believe Pam Bondi leaked the document or protected something even bigger? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this story stunned you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss tomorrow's drop. Share this with someone who still thinks the guard just stands still. Trust me, they need to see this. 2 more stories just like this one are now on your screen. Watch them next and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.